The story begins with our protagonist, Jibiki, running with all his strength across an endless open meadow. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his desperate cries for help vanished into the wind, because he knew perfectly well that there was no one in this place who could save him. A strange creature was chasing him. It resembled a rabbit, but it had a deadly horn and kept attacking him relentlessly without giving him a moment to escape. Just as the fear of death was about to paralyze him, he heard a calm, mechanical female voice echo inside his mind asking, "Would you like to activate the voice assistant?" He had reached the absolute limit of his strength and could only say, "Please, don't leave me alone." At that moment, fate intervened in the most ironic way possible. He tripped over a tree root and fell flat on his face, while the rabbit had already launched its attack. Its horn became lodged in Jibiki's bag, and by pure coincidence, our protagonist's weight crushed the monster without him even meaning to. Jibiki was trembling, and his heart was pounding so violently that he did not even realize he had killed his first enemy. Terror still had complete control over him. Meanwhile, not too far away, a sharp-eyed elf suddenly stopped in her tracks. A magical spirit spoke to her and told her that she had to head east immediately because something of immeasurable value had descended upon those lands. The girl was deeply surprised by the urgency of the message. The elf prepared her equipment and set off, following the magical vibrations that were guiding her toward the mysterious person who had just arrived. Returning to our protagonist, Jibiki finally managed to catch his breath. He stared at his phone in confusion. There was no signal, the GPS was not working, and the scenery surrounding him was completely unfamiliar. When he looked at the animal that had nearly killed him, he suddenly felt extremely hungry. However, the idea of eating a monster disgusted him. At that moment, the voice inside his head appeared again to evaluate the creature. A transparent panel materialized before his eyes and informed him that the meat of this horned rabbit was not only edible, but would also taste excellent if cooked into a stew. Even though the thought of touching a dead animal for the first time made him extremely uncomfortable, he placed the prey inside his bag. When he noticed that the voice responded to his questions, he began interrogating the system. He asked about his bag, and the panel told him that it contained materials originating from another world. Then he asked about the sky, but the voice said that there was nothing worth analyzing. However, when he analyzed the ground beneath his feet, the system displayed a terrifying warning. Directly beneath him was a level 274 labyrinth eater. Fear took control of him once again, but he decided to use the opportunity to analyze himself. The status panel confirmed his name and age, but some of the information left him confused. His race was listed as human, yet his occupation was temporary appraiser. He also possessed a collection of skills that he could not fully understand. When he asked the voice, "Who are you?" it simply replied, "I am your personal status assistant." Jibiki became excited and attempted to activate a skill called Expert's Eye, expecting himself to undergo some kind of legendary transformation. However, after several seconds, he nearly died of embarrassment when he realized that absolutely nothing had happened. Disappointed, he decided to use the world map skill to determine his location. But instead of seeing the detailed map he had expected, he found nothing more than a series of random lines marking the path he had taken while running. That was when he realized the painful truth. He had been running in circles the entire time. After walking for several hours, Jibiki finally discovered what appeared to be a paved road. He rushed toward it, only to trip once again and fall flat on his face. However, the pain vanished the moment he saw signs indicating the presence of civilization. At that exact moment, the voice informed him that he had acquired the title, Lost in a Parallel World. Unfortunately, his terrible luck refused to leave him alone. When he glanced to the side, he saw something horrifying. A monstrous creature emerged from the darkness and terrified our protagonist. But before it could attack him, a perfectly aimed shot ended its life in an instant. Turned around in fear and spotted a girl standing in the distance. His heart filled with joy because he had finally seen another person. The voice inside his head automatically activated translation mode, allowing him to understand her words. The girl approached and asked whether he was injured. Jibiki said he was not, but he could not stop staring in amazement at her pointed ears. After introducing himself, he could no longer contain his curiosity and asked, "Are you an elf?" She calmly confirmed that he was correct. Jibiki then told her that her cosplay looked amazing. She stared at him in complete confusion, because she had no idea what the word cosplay even meant. The elf, whose name was Imalia, asked whether he had come from the Labyrinth Eater's plane. Still confused, Jibiki admitted that he had simply appeared there out of nowhere. While they were speaking, he used his appraisal skill on her, and was shocked when he saw her information. She was 56 years old, despite looking like a young girl. Emalia began explaining the danger he had been in. She told him that the Labyrinth Eater was an enormous monster that disguised itself as a vast plain. Once its victims became exhausted and collapsed, it swallowed them whole. She then praised him, telling him that, for a child, he had been incredibly brave to escape from that place alive. When she hugged him, Jibiki was startled and quickly corrected her, saying, "I'm not a child. I'm 16 years old." This time, Emalia was the one who became surprised, because by elven standards, Jibiki was far older than she had imagined. Several hours later, the two of them set up camp and ate the rabbit meat from our protagonist's bag for dinner. As they talked, Jibiki's suspicions were finally confirmed. He truly was in another world, because when he mentioned Japan, Emalia was extremely confused and told him that she had never heard that name before. He also learned that anyone in this world was considered an adult upon turning 15. Emalia promised to take him to the nearest city in the morning, allowing Jibiki to sleep peacefully for the first time. However, while he slept, Emalia continued staring at him and began to suspect that he might be the treasure the magical spirit had spoken about. Her suspicions were confirmed when she heard the spirit thanking her in a dream for protecting the boy. As he sank into a deep sleep, Jibiki briefly returned to memories of his old life. He remembered talking with his friends, who had always joked about his short stature. However, in their eyes, his small and youthful appearance was his greatest advantage when it came to girls. His memories continued until they reached the final school day before vacation. At that moment, a brilliant light abducted him from his world and transported him into the new one. When he woke up, he was amazed by the scenery and the lights surrounding the campsite. After asking about them, he learned that they were part of a magical detection barrier. He then reviewed his statistics and discovered that the rank B appraiser occupation was useful for analysis, but possessed no combat abilities. Accepting the situation, he decided to sleep a little longer. At sunrise, he asked how much farther they had to travel before reaching the city. She told him that it would take half a day of walking and that monsters would pose no danger as long as he remained with her. However, he replied that there was no danger in the first place because his world map skill was not showing any red dots. Emalia was stunned because World Map was a rank A skill, and she became irritated that he did not appreciate its true value. While they were talking, Jibiki detected a horned crystal rabbit. Emalia became excited because its horn was a rare treasure. With the help of her skills, they approached it without being noticed. She began imagining how useful Jibiki would be if he joined her party, but her pride prevented her from making the offer. The battle began, but the rabbit quickly escaped the first arrow. Jibiki then suggested using himself as bait because he had learned that the rabbit became slower while attacking. Emalia carried out the plan, trapping the creature with an earthen wall and leaving it only one escape route leading directly toward Jibiki. The moment it leaped, she struck it with a direct arrow and ended the battle. Afterward, several of Jibiki's skills increased in level because of the plan's success, and Emalia admitted that they made an excellent team. At high above them, the ruler who had transported Jibiki into this new world watched them with satisfaction now that Jibiki had completed the first stage of his training. However, the real challenges had only just begun. After a long journey, they arrived in the city of Rue, and Jibiki was amazed by its enormous size and bustling crowds. Emalia covered him with her cloak to hide his strange clothing and told him that selling the crystal horn would earn them approximately 200 gold coins. When he learned that a single coin was worth roughly 10,000 Japanese yen, he realized that they were carrying a small fortune. When they entered the Adventurers Guild, several adventurers mocked Emalia. However, she introduced Jibiki as a novice adventurer with great potential, causing some of the members to welcome him. Jibiki, meanwhile, was too busy staring in amazement at Jewel, the receptionist, because of her cat-like ears. After that, they were taken into a private room to meet the guild master, Bals. What happened next was extremely strange from Jibiki's perspective. Bals suddenly tore his own shirt apart to show off his enormous, muscular body. Jibiki could not stop himself from complimenting him. He felt a mild sense of envy toward that physique, because he knew that with his natural build and small body, he would never be able to achieve such a form. However, their conversation drifted completely away from the subject of the sale, and the two men continued discussing Balz's exercise routine until the girls grew bored. They used a little magic to snap the men back to their senses and return them to the matter at hand. Finally, Emalia revealed the crystal horn. Suddenly, the entire room fell silent. Bals was stunned by the horn's size and the purity of its crystal. He offered them 400 gold coins, twice the amount Jibiki had expected. However, to everyone's surprise, Emalia confidently rejected the offer and demanded 800 gold coins instead. She justified her demand by explaining that a similar horn had been sold for that exact price 3 years earlier. After a long negotiation filled with arguments and back-and-forth bargaining, Emilia even threatened to take the prize and sell it in the cappy. But the most important thing was the medical book. The moment he activated the skill, all of its medical knowledge flooded into his mind at once, causing such a horrific headache that he lost consciousness. However, he emerged from the experience possessing medical knowledge that no one else in this world had. Meanwhile, Emilia was telling Evil about Jibiki before Celia arrived. Celia was the head maid and the person closest to her. The atmosphere quickly turned comedic when the mysterious girl proudly announced that she had become a companion in Emalia's party, leaving Emilia feeling both happy and nervous at the same time. After Jibiki regained consciousness, he bought new clothes, ate some food, and decided to rename his status assistant Sisti, because she had become his only guide in this world. However, the peace ended when he entered the guild, and a critically wounded adventurer was brought inside. Jibiki remembered him because he had treated him respectfully from the very first day. With Guildmaster Bao's absent, Jewel panicked because there was no one capable of treating him. Using the medical book, Jibiki discovered that the injured man had been poisoned, that the poison was preventing healing magic from working, and that he would die within 5 minutes unless advanced treatment was used on him first, followed by complete healing. However, Jibiki's mana reserves were far too low. Sisti suggested that he use the contract skill, so he asked everyone present to allow him to borrow their magical energy. Everyone agreed, and even Jewel contributed more than 200 mana points. Jibiki then used advanced treatment to stop the poison's effects before activating complete healing. A white light filled the entire guild, and every wound vanished completely. Even the man's severed leg was restored exactly as it had been. After expending such an enormous amount of effort, Jibiki fell into a deep sleep. While unconscious, he remembered that he had always been willing to sacrifice his own life to save someone else. After some time, he woke to the sound of Sisti's voice. She told him that his level had risen tremendously because of what he had accomplished. At that moment, Jewel entered the room with tears of joy streaming down her face and revealed that the man he had saved was her brother. However, she also warned him seriously. She had asked everyone present to keep what happened a secret, because a healer capable of performing miracles on that level would become a target for every major power. They would try to exploit him and use him as a tool to generate profit. Jewel advised our protagonist to find a party he could trust, or at the very least hire a personal guard, because she knew that his kindness could drag him into serious trouble. At the same time, inside a nearby cell, a massive wolf was protecting a little girl and reassuring her that no one would be able to hurt her. After that, Jibiki went to a security company to hire guards. The company's owner, Debbie, welcomed him enthusiastically and offered him his finest guards, but Jibiki rejected every one of them because he was searching for someone with an enormous amount of mana who could help him use healing magic. Debbie allowed him to choose for himself and revealed that he possessed a strange ability that allowed him to smell people who would bring him enormous profits. During his tour, Jibiki noticed underground cells filled with outcasts. Despite Debbie's warning, he insisted on seeing them. There, he encountered a gigantic wolf suffering from severe wounds and missing limbs, accompanied by a little girl. Debbie explained that the wolf had been injured while protecting her, but the city's laws prevented him from being released. Jibiki used appraisal, followed by expert's eye, and discovered that the wolf's name was Claude. He was a level 95 hero, but he was afflicted by the curse known as unbreakable chains. He also discovered that the girl, Lillian, possessed the title Sage. Jibiki immediately decided to take both of them with him. In the forest, Claude remained suspicious of Jibiki's intentions, but Jibiki revealed that he wanted to heal him. Lillian agreed to help and transferred part of her magical energy to Jibiki through a contract. He then used complete healing. Within moments, Claude's missing limbs returned and all of his wounds vanished completely. Jibiki then told him that he knew he was a hero and that he also knew about the curse weakening him. He activated the curse reduction skill, causing transparent chains to appear. A magical pair of scissors descended and cut through only one of them because the skill was still at level 1. Even so, Claude recovered a significant portion of his power. Claude was deeply moved. He declared his absolute loyalty to Jibiki and requested that they complete a loyalty contract. Jibiki agreed, causing a magical circle to appear and sacred markings to form on their hands. Sisti confirmed that the spirits of light had acknowledged the oath, transforming it into eternal loyalty. Claude then knelt before his new master. Elsewhere, Emilia continued her journey through the mountains. When she noticed that Syria had grown tired, she told her that they would rest at some nearby hot springs before continuing their journey. Syria was delighted by the idea. Meanwhile, Jibiki explained to Claude and Lillian that his own mana reserves were low, and that in order to use his magic, he needed to receive part of their magical energy through contracts. They both agreed, and after the mana transfer was complete, Sisti announced that the grimoire skill had increased in level. Hibiki became extremely excited, which confused Claude because he could see him speaking to someone who was not there. Hibiki then admitted that he could hear a voice inside his head. Claude was surprised and asked whether he possessed the tutorial skill and the title Lost in Another World. When Hibiki confirmed it, Claude explained that those abilities were unique to people who had arrived from other worlds. He also assured Hibiki that this revelation would not change his loyalty. Claude added that tutorial was one of the most powerful skills, because it consumed a significant portion of the main ruler's power. Claude then revealed that Lillian possessed a skill called Wild Sanctuary. It generated such an enormous amount of mana that it could gradually destroy her body over time. He suspected that her family had abandoned her because of it, and accused the ruler of magic of being responsible. However, the truth was that the main ruler was the one who had granted her that ability. In the heavenly realm, the ruler of magic scolded the main ruler for what he had done. She then contacted Hibiki herself and explained that removing the skill would be difficult, but the grimoire would allow him to control Lillian's power easily through automatic mode. Because of the chaos between the two rulers, the expert's eye and tutorial skills were temporarily disabled. Hibiki hoped that the main ruler was alright, while the ruler of magic felt as though she had seen Hibiki somewhere before. Finally, Hibiki activated the grimoire skill, causing a small cat named Benny to appear. She introduced herself as the skill's true physical manifestation and as a magical beast created by the ruler of magic to stabilize Lillian's mana. Hibiki then began pampering Benny, causing Claude to become comically jealous and complain that he had not received even a single pat on the head yet. Several hours later, the group entered a weapons shop. Hibiki was surprised that Claude chose a spear instead of a sword, but Claude explained that his speed made a spear better suited to him. He also preferred light armor because it was more comfortable. Afterward, Lillian became interested in an outfit priced at 30 gold coins. Hibiki was shocked by the cost, while Claude considered it cheap. In the end, Hibiki bought the outfit for her, despite knowing that their money was nearly gone. The situation did not end there, because Benny then asked for a collar that cost 15 gold coins, causing Hibiki to spend nearly everything he had left. Once they left the shop, Benny announced that it was time to begin training. She explained that Lillian needed to learn how to control her mana, while Hibiki needed to strengthen himself. When he asked to learn offensive magic, she told him that he first had to master the fundamentals. She then bit him, and through that bite, she formed a magical contract that made him responsible for regulating the flow of magical power emerging from Lillian. The training began when Benny asked Claude to transfer a small amount of mana to Hibiki. However, Claude unintentionally overdid it and poured such an enormous quantity into him that Hibiki lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself in a peaceful place beside a silver lake. He saw an elf named Anastasia, calling him Claude. At that moment, he realized that he was witnessing Claude's memories through Claude's own eyes. He saw joyful moments, battles, and memories that revealed just how precious Anastasia had been to him. But suddenly, the entire world turned red. Claude was covered in severe wounds, while Anastasia stood before him with a smile filled with evil. Before Hibiki could understand the reason behind her betrayal, he suddenly woke up. Claude apologized for transferring more mana than he should have, while Benny explained that the excess mana had pulled Hibiki into Claude's subconscious. When they asked him what he had seen, Hibiki lied and claimed that he had not witnessed anything important. However, the image of Claude calling out in despair remained permanently etched into his mind. After several hours of training, Hibiki returned to his apartment and began cleaning it with strange enthusiasm. The reason was that Benny had explained that magical spirits would not be able to assist him until he trained them first. This training required him to repeatedly perform the same everyday task while using mana. Over time, the spirits would learn to perform that work by themselves through magic. The training was extremely exhausting, and just as Hibiki was about to finish, Claude entered the apartment. Because he was distracted, he knocked a bucket of water onto the floor. However, instead of becoming annoyed, Hibiki laughed. He was happy to see that even a legendary hero could make mistakes in simple matters. Afterward, he continued cleaning the hallway until it shone. Sisti told him that he still had not learned any new skill, but immediately afterward, Tanya entered and saw how incredibly clean the place had become. She smiled and told him that he deserved a double serving of food, which was the greatest reward he could have received after all the effort he had put in. The next day, the party went out to train again. Hibiki felt a little jealous as he watched Lillian learn at an astonishing speed. She could understand anything in record time. Claude noticed his frustration and encouraged him, telling him that he still had plenty of time to improve himself, and that the most important thing right now was to focus on his archery training. Hibiki kept trying to fire arrows, but every arrow traveled only a few yards before falling to the ground. Even so, he refused to stop training. He repeated the attempt over and over until his hands became swollen and wounded from the bowstring rubbing against them. Claude smiled in a way that made Hibiki feel as though he was about to torture him and said, "Why did you stop? You have the medical book, don't you? Then heal your hands and continue training." From that moment onward, Hibiki became trapped in a relentless cycle. He would get injured, heal himself, and then return to firing arrows again. Eventually, he became convinced that Claude was an incredibly harsh trainer, but that he genuinely wanted to make him stronger. Meanwhile, Emilia was happy because she finally had a friend to travel with. When they reached a fork in the road, they chose the shortcut that passed through a ruined castle after Aber insisted on going there in the hope of finding treasure. Emilia agreed because she needed money, especially since she had left the rest of the Crystal Rabbit's payment in the bank. After training, Hibiki prepared lunch with Lillian's help. While they ate, he discovered that Claude was completely hopeless at chopping vegetables, despite being highly skilled at fighting monsters. When Hibiki asked him about the curse he had mentioned, Claude remained silent, so Hibiki understood that he should not pressure him. Afterward, Hibiki learned a new skill called bubble cleaning. At the same time, he detected an armored wild boar, but Claude killed it with a single strike, and Lillian used water magic to wash away the blood. Claude then said that the time had come for Hibiki to. Syria had fallen under the influence of an illusion, but Aber was the one who saved them both from it. As for Hibiki, after he finished butchering the boar, he tested the bubble cleaning spell on Claude, despite his companion's warnings. The result was astonishing, as the spell completely cleaned his fur and washed away his exhaustion. After several days of spending money, Hibiki gathered the party and told them that their funds were running low, so they needed to start accepting missions from the guild. Claude suggested that they begin with rank F missions, and they officially registered for them. While there, they noticed a notice about a mysterious female thief, but Hibiki assumed that dealing with her was beyond their current level. During their first mission, they encountered a horned rabbit. Hibiki failed to hit it several times before finally killing it, and Claude advised him that he needed to finish his prey with a single arrow. Afterward, Lillian and Benny returned with the required herbs, along with glowing fruits they could use to mark the path back. Meanwhile, Emilia gave Ebel a friendship bracelet and told her that the spirits of nature would protect her through it, while Ebel decided to continue pretending that their friendship was genuine. When Hibiki's party returned to the guild, they collected their reward, and the receptionist was surprised that a rank F party had managed to gather such a large quantity. Bowles then appeared and offered to train Hibiki personally, but Claude refused because he considered himself responsible for Hibiki's training. Their argument quickly escalated into a violent fight. After Hibiki used appraisal, he discovered that Bowles was slightly stronger than Claude. In the end, Jewel intervened with ice magic and stopped the battle instantly. Immediately afterward, however, a woman rushed inside screaming that her bag had been stolen. Hibiki then discovered that his own bag, which contained the money from their missions, had also disappeared. Jewel suspected that the same thief was responsible, so they devised a plan to catch her. They made Hibiki wear a dress and a wig, pretending that he was going out with Lillian, while carrying a fake bag of money as bait. Claude watched from a distance, still upset about the theft and his defeat against Bowles. A short while later, the food arrived, but before they could take their first bite, Claude suddenly leaped to his feet and declared that they had been tricked. The waitress herself was the thief. The girl immediately ran for it, but her haste caused her to leave behind a clear trail, and the entire party began chasing her. After a long pursuit, they arrived in a poor and isolated district. The streets were filled with homeless people and shadowy corners, making it obvious that this was the perfect hiding place for any criminal. When they entered, they found a secret bar filled with smoke and the stench of cheap alcohol. Strangely, several men approached Hibiki, but instead of attacking him, they mistook him for a girl in trouble and tried to help him. This only confused Hibiki even more while he was still wearing his disguise. In the middle of the crowd, he bumped into someone wearing a cloak. Claude sensed that something was wrong and quickly told him, "Appraise her." Hibiki immediately used his appraisal skill. Seconds later, Claude stepped in front of the girl and blocked her path. Hibiki and Lillian ordered her to return the money because Hibiki had uncovered her true identity. Her name was Fauna, and she possessed a magical tail that allowed her to change her appearance. Realizing that her identity had been exposed, she removed her cloak and revealed her true form. Oh, what a surprise! Even Claude was stunned, not only by her beauty, but also because the bloodline of the shape-shifting tailed ones had become incredibly rare among beastmen. However, Fauna merely laughed mockingly and admitted that she had deliberately lured them to that place. She explained that the bag they believed was bait had been fake from the very beginning. As for the real money, she had stolen it from Jibiki only moments earlier. Jibiki then remembered that she had bumped into him while escaping. He realized that she had robbed him at that exact moment. When they tried to capture her, she pressed a hidden mechanism, and barrels and wooden beams suddenly began falling from above. Claude threw himself over Jibiki and protected him from the debris. From within the cloud of dust, he shouted, "Run after the thief! Don't let her escape!" Jibiki chased after Fauna, but he fell into a trap and ended up hanging from the ceiling. Fauna laughed at him, and when she realized that he was only a young boy, she offered him a deal. She wanted him to appraise several items for her in exchange for ending their conflict. During the appraisal, he discovered that a simple wooden bracelet was actually a special blessing meant for beastmen. A message had been engraved upon it, reading, "Thank you, my beloved sister." Fauna was deeply moved because the bracelet had been a gift from her sister before her death, and no one had ever been able to read the message before. She then returned the bag of money to Jibiki and kissed him on the cheek before leaving. Afterward, the party met with Balls, who told them that the king had ordered the elite adventurers to eliminate the undead. However, he reassured Jibiki that his training would prepare him for what was coming. When they returned to the inn, Claude told Jibiki that reaching the Great Sages required passing through a legendary dungeon. Jibiki began seriously considering the journey, especially after realizing that if he returned to his own world, he would be leaving his friends behind forever. Claude promised that he would continue protecting him until Jibiki decided his own fate. Meanwhile, Himalaya said that they were approaching the village thanks to the guidance of the spirits. She remembered that a spirit had once told her about something precious located west of the city of Lowile. The moment Aber heard this, she hurried back to that location, convinced that she would find the spirit of the woman she had been searching for. Several days later, Ebel reached her objective and declared that her next target would be easier because his legs and arms were injured. It was then revealed that the person she was referring to was Claude. Meanwhile, Jibiki was speaking with his party about reaching the sages. Claude confirmed that the route passed through a dangerous dungeon and that Jibiki's training needed to become even harsher. At the same time, Lillian was upset and walked away from them. When Bowles learned that there was tension between them, he decided to help in his own way. A brutal training session then began in the forest. Bowles and Claude disagreed over the proper training method. One wanted to strengthen Jibiki's muscles, while the other wanted to focus on his agility. Jibiki endured hours of exhausting exercises, while Lillian watched him from a distance with pain in her heart, because she knew he was pushing himself so hard in order to return to his world. By the end of the training, Jibiki collapsed from exhaustion after firing hundreds of arrows, most of which had missed their targets. He was shocked to discover that his statistics had not changed at all. During yet another argument between Bowles and Claude, Jewel appeared and froze both of them with ice magic, ending the dispute in an instant. A short while later, the party went to rest at the hot springs. There, Jibiki asked Claude about his past. Claude coldly replied that his kingdom had been destroyed. All of his companions had died, and his only purpose now was to protect Jibiki. That night, Lillian tearfully confessed that she did not want him to return to his world because every time she saw him exhausting himself for that goal, her heart ached. She then gave him an energizing drink she had made herself. He thanked her with a smile, bringing the smile back to her face as well. Meanwhile, Himalaya found it strange that she had returned home, but still had not met her father. And seeing the dress that had been prepared for her, she began to suspect that her father had summoned her for another reason. In the forest, Ebel hid while observing Claude, while Jibiki noticed a strange dot on the map. Before he could understand what it meant, Claude exposed Ebel's hiding place. She claimed that she had been fleeing from a silver wolf, but Jibiki found it strange that she had not appeared on the map. He also noticed that she could sense when he used appraisal. Meanwhile, she was shocked to see that Claude's arms had been completely restored, because she was the one who had cut them off before. The party then followed the wolf, but suddenly found themselves surrounded by hundreds of wolves. One of them attacked Jibiki and tore open his back, turning the pursuit into a disaster. Ebel watched from the top of a tree, surprised that Claude's curse had been partially purified. Even so, she remained certain that they would all die in the end. Lillian tried to heal Jibiki, but the bleeding would not stop. Claude decided to sacrifice himself and ordered Lillian to carry Jibiki back to the guild while he held off the wolves. However, the wolves ignored them and focused entirely on Claude. When he looked into the leader's eyes, he felt that its gaze resembled Anastasia's. Lillian escaped with Jibiki into a cave and sealed the entrance, but the wolves began breaking through it. Jibiki tried to use the medical book, but Sisti told him that his condition would not allow it. Despite that, he forced himself to stand. Suddenly, the system announced that his level had increased and that the Expert's Eye and Tutorial Mode skills had been restored. After healing himself and drinking a mana potion, he used the Sacred Beast summoning skill for the first time. A gigantic white tiger surrounded by lightning appeared, and it was revealed to be Benny's true form, a servant of the ruler of magic. With a single lightning strike, Benny annihilated the wolves. However, he explained that this power was only temporary before returning to his small form. Benny's warning that the wolf fighting Claude was diamond rank, Jibiki refused to abandon him. Sisti then rewarded him with the staff of the ruler of medicine. Jibiki used it to heal himself and all of his allies. Afterward, a celestial bow from the ruler's world appeared before him, unlocking a new skill called Spirit Archery. The moment he pulled back the bowstring, an arrow made of pure light appeared, carrying the same power Imalia had been using. Meanwhile, the ruler watched everything with a smile, certain that he had chosen the right person. Deep within the forest, Claude was trapped in the worst possible situation, surrounded on every side, while Evil watched him from above with a cold smile. Jibiki, meanwhile, was racing at full speed while riding Lillian's Earth Beast, which tore through the ground as it charged forward. Suddenly, however, a pack of ruby wolves blocked the path. Jibiki realized that he had no choice but to fight, so he drew the spirit bow. Because of the beast's movement, aiming was impossible. Sisti quickly told him, "Activate Expert's Eye." The moment he did, the entire world changed. Every target was marked before him with incredible precision, and Sisti informed him that his accuracy rate was 100%. Jibiki released the arrows, which shot forward like beams of light and cleared the entire path within moments. At the same time, under Benny's instructions, Lillian began using elemental magic and eliminated the remaining wolves attacking from the sides. As Benny watched the battle, he suspiciously noted that the wolves' behavior was unnatural. He was certain that the diamond silver wolf was controlling them. He also pointed out Abel's behavior and said that there was something suspicious about it. Claude continued fighting until his very last breath, but his strength was beginning to run out. He fell to his knees before the diamond wolf as the beast prepared to kill him. Claude looked at it and said in pain, "Why, Anastasia? Why are you tormenting me like this?" He tried to attack one final time, but the monster was faster, and a single strike tore open his abdomen. Just as the wolf was about to kill him, Jibiki and his party arrived, and Jibiki fired a spirit arrow. However, the arrow struck the wolf's barrier and fell uselessly to the ground. Jibiki screamed in despair, and suddenly, the mark on his body released a mysterious power. In the blink of an eye, Claude was teleported directly in front of him. At that same moment, Lillian created a whirlwind. The whirlwind protected them from the wolf's attack and deflected the rocks it was hurling at them. Jibiki and Sisti began diagnosing Claude's condition, and the results were terrible. Severe bleeding, deep wounds, and traces of the same poison that had been inside Jibiki's body. Jibiki immediately began removing the poison. At the same time, he appraised the diamond wolf and discovered that it was suffering from the same poison. On top of that, a fragment of Anastasia's spirit was controlling it. Hearing that name brought fragmented memories back to Jibiki. However, after sealing Claude's wounds with additional treatment, he consumed Lillian's final point of mana, causing the magical barrier to disappear. The wolf charged toward Jibiki, and he tried to fire an arrow, but the skill failed to activate. Suddenly, a terrifying strike. The wolf froze in place, and Claude rose to his feet once again. At the critical moment, Sisti activated Enlightenment Mode within Hibiki. His gaze pierced through all the falsified data, allowing him to see the truth. Claude was not a level 25 warrior, as everyone had believed. Standing before him was a true level 95 hero. With a devastating strike, Claude shattered the wolf's armor and hurled it with tremendous force into the wall. Suddenly, a spear of golden light appeared in his hand, and its radiance flooded the entire area with a sacred aura. Confidently declared that what came next would be easier than cutting through paper. He began soaring upward, and at the same moment, he activated a technique that could never miss. The spear, overflowing with energy, descended like a meteor and purified both the monster's body and soul in an explosion that shook the entire forest. After the thunderous explosion, Anastasia's spirit briefly appeared among the ruins like a fading apparition. In a voice filled with peace and serenity, she thanked Hibiki for freeing her from her sins. She then looked at Claude with deep regret before disappearing forever. At that moment, Enlightenment Mode ended and Claude returned to normal. However, With tears filling his eyes, he knelt before Hibiki and asked for forgiveness for the past. He admitted that Anastasia had once been his companion, but she had betrayed him, forcing him to kill her with his own hands. Yet it seemed that her spirit had continued spreading destruction because of his negligence. Our protagonist was deeply moved by his words and refused to blame him. He believed that Claude himself was a victim who had suffered mutilation, betrayal, and curses. Touched by his master's mercy, Claude renewed his oath of loyalty and promised to protect him until his final breath. Hibiki tried to reject such an oath, but his body could no longer endure any more. The exhaustion caused by enlightenment mode overwhelmed him, and he lost consciousness. In his final waking moment, he heard the ruler's voice warning him about the tremendous price of that power. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the heavenly kingdom was deceptively calm as the main ruler observed the threads of fate. He felt relieved when he saw that Hibiki had survived, but deep inside, he blamed the ruler of magic for her recklessness. The spell she had used on him lasted for so long that even he, despite his absolute power, had been unable to intervene. However, that calm was shattered by the arrival of the ruler of the underworld. She explained that she had come after sensing traces of one of her forbidden machines, which had been used against the ruler. He reassured her that the problem had already been resolved, while the ruler of magic continued acting in her usual provocative manner. The conversation then shifted to the vacant throne of the underworld, since no new demon king had appeared yet. The ruler of the underworld admitted that there were several promising candidates, but she feared that power might corrupt them. She then bid them farewell, promising that she would find the right person. After she left, the main ruler remained alone with his thoughts. The ruler of magic had said that Hibiki's face looked familiar to her, and he had completely denied it. But the truth that terrified him was that he feared the secret might be exposed. He had wanted Hibiki to live a happy human life in his original world, but now Hibiki had ended up here. Because of that, he had no choice but to grant him power that shattered every known standard, hoping that no one would discover the connection between them. 2 days later, the silence of the inn was broken by Sisti's voice inside Hibiki's mind. She informed him that his skills and occupations had evolved tremendously, and that his level had risen from 12 to 25. Hibiki suddenly woke up, every one of his senses sharpened to its limit, and his heart pounding rapidly. When he opened his eyes, he found his companions staring at him with relief and astonishment. After spending 2 full days unconscious, he felt an overwhelming hunger that reminded him that no matter how powerful he became, his body was still that of an ordinary human. Elsewhere, the Elven Kingdom had been decorated in preparation for a grand ceremony. Imalia, who had been forced to attend because of her noble lineage, moved among the guests with perfect elegance, while inwardly despising the entire place. Her father's continued absence only intensified her anger, and she kept trying to escape Prince Verdilis's attention. The situation reached its peak when the Elven King announced before everyone that his son had received the title of hero, while Melen of the Harton family had received the title of sage. He then declared that the two of them would embark on a holy campaign to defeat the Demon King. They would be accompanied by the Holy Knight Dogir, the strongest warrior in the kingdom, as well as Imalia, whose experience as an adventurer would be essential to the mission. However, the true shock came when Prince Verdilis stepped forward and publicly declared that once he returned with the Demon King's head, he would marry Imalia and unite the bloodlines of their two families forever. Imalia entered a state of complete shock and vanished from before everyone before anyone could even process what had happened. Returning once again to Hibiki, he and his group were enjoying a luxurious dinner, which soon became the beginning of an important confession. Hibiki told them that he needed to travel to Terra Dinas as quickly as possible, because his heart was still tied to his original world, where his family and friends were waiting for him. However, the thought of leaving his current companions behind was also incredibly painful. Because of that, he suggested that they search for a way to travel between worlds without being forced to separate. His words caused Lillian's face to light up, and she swore that she would continue following him until the final moment of her life. Claude, despite being the most realistic among them, knew that traveling between dimensions was nearly impossible. However, his faith in his master had no limits, and so Claude, Hibiki, and Benny renewed a new oath between them. The first step in their plan was to open the dangerous dungeon in the north so they could reach the land of the sages. Meanwhile, at the site of the previous battle, Evil stood coldly staring into the enormous crater left behind by Claude's power. Despite the defeat, he showed no fear. Silently, he promised his mistress that he would kill Claude, and that sooner or later, Anastasia's spirit would belong to him. During a period of rest, Lillian approached Hibiki and asked him about the people he had said he wanted to see in the other world. He explained to everyone that they were his family, his friends, and the people he used to sit with while drinking tea and talking. It was a simple and warm memory, but Claude understood it immediately and felt that those people must miss Hibiki just as much as he missed them. A short while later, they all went to the Adventurers Guild. Bowles welcomed Hibiki by congratulating him on defeating the Diamond Silver Wolf, considering it an incredible achievement for any adventurer. At the same time, however, he complained that Hibiki's physical fitness was too weak. He claimed that if Hibiki had trained his muscles more, he would not have lost consciousness like that, and then offered him a hellish training program. However, Jewel interrupted him and told him to get straight to the point, because they had summoned Hibiki to collect his reward. Hibiki was stunned by the enormous amount of money, but Jewel explained that the reward was so large because his achievement had prevented the monster from reaching the city. Had it reached them, the resulting losses would have been catastrophic. Hibiki thanked them, then told his companions that they would use the money to purchase everything they needed in preparation for exploring the dungeon. A short while later, the group arrived at Debbie's shop. He welcomed them the moment he smelled the scent of money coming from our protagonist's pockets. Hibiki became slightly nervous because Claude and Lillian looked completely different from the last time they had visited, but Debbie reassured him that his company never interfered in its customers' private affairs. They then entered the weapons section, where Hibiki almost immediately chose a robe reinforced with wind magic to increase his speed and agility. Debbie asked whether he needed a weapon, but Hibiki replied that the bow given to him by the ruler was enough. He then encouraged Lillian to choose something for herself. Lillian selected a magical staff completely decorated with roses, and it suited her perfectly. However, the problem was that it cost 100 gold coins. Hibiki was shocked by the price, but Claude told him that it was actually incredibly cheap, because this type of staff normally cost no less than 150 gold coins. Claude chose a set of light armor. Hibiki became worried because he remembered the old injury in Claude's abdomen, but Debbie reassured him that the armor was infused with defensive magic and would protect its wearer just as effectively as a full suit of armor. Claude also chose a spear made from flexible magnetic stone, which was perfectly suited for the narrow passages inside the dungeon. Hibiki used his appraisal skill on it and confirmed that the spear was filled with an extremely high level of magical energy. When Debbie saw that, he curiously asked about Hibiki's appraisal skill level. Upon learning that it had reached level 5, he was completely stunned. He explained that most appraisers barely managed to reach level 2, and even the finest appraiser in his company was still only at level 3. Those words made Hibiki slightly afraid, because he realized that the ruler had given him an incredibly rare power without even warning him. At that moment, however, the ruler spoke inside his mind and reminded him that he was now capable of using the technique he had wanted for a long time. Before Hibiki could finish thinking about it, Debbie interrupted him and offered them a wagon, a horse, and enough supplies for the journey. Hibiki immediately accepted. Several hours later, while they were in the forest, Hibiki began gathering his energy to remove Claude's curse using the comfort measurement spell. The system then appeared and announced that it would summon the sacred beast Carbuncle to strengthen the purification process. But the moment the beast appeared, it turned out to be an incredibly adorable rabbit. Hibiki and Lillian were unable to resist its appearance. They immediately began pampering it and stroking its fur, eventually deciding to call it Car as a shortened version of its name. The rabbit tried to maintain its dignity, but eventually surrendered and began enjoying the attention. The sight ignited Claude's jealousy as he watched how much affection the rabbit received. Benny, meanwhile, struck both Hibiki and Lillian on the head and ordered them to stop playing and focus on the mission for which they had summoned it. Carr, who was also terrified by Claude's murderous glares, quickly carried out his task and fired a beam of sacred light at the chains binding Claude. After an effort that lasted for some time, the chains shattered, and Claude felt all of his power return to him once again. Hibiki told him to thank Carr, but Claude forced out his gratitude through clenched teeth while glaring at the rabbit so terrifyingly that it became frightened, instantly vanished, and returned to the heavenly realm. Before it disappeared, Claude sarcastically remarked that a sacred beast like that should have maintained at least some of its dignity. Several days later, the group was sitting inside their room, suffering through a suffocating heat wave as the temperature approached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. When Hibiki noticed that Claude was suffering from the heat more than anyone else, he suggested that Claude cut his hair. Claude was surprised by the idea, but immediately agreed because it was his master's request, while Lillian became extremely excited about it. She used his magic to clean herself, and of course, our protagonist helped her, just as she had asked. A short while later, Hibiki decided to go for a walk with Benny and search for any possible way to escape the heat while Lillian remained behind with Claude. The streets were almost completely empty because of the scorching weather, but before long, they ran into Debbie. Strangely, he was walking around normally without a single drop of sweat on him, thanks to the special clothing he was wearing. Afterward, they met Jewel, who explained to Hibiki that those clothes carried an enchantment called Eternal Spring, which allowed the wearer to feel a comfortable, moderate temperature at all times. The problem, however, was that making such clothing was extremely difficult because it required a very rare flower that only grew deep within the eastern forest. Hibiki immediately decided to retrieve those flowers so he could provide some relief for his companions. Jewel became worried because he was heading out without Claude or Lillian, so she decided to accompany him and protect him. As they walked through the forest, Jewel praised him and said that he was doing all of this for his friends. Hibiki replied that he was simply repaying their kindness because they had never left him alone and had always protected him. He added that Claude had been willing to sacrifice his own life for him, so he had to return the favor, especially now that all of them were exhausted from the heat. His words deeply moved Jewel, and she told him that his companions had started becoming more like him because they had been influenced by his character. They became so absorbed in conversation that time passed quickly, and by the time they noticed, they had already reached the place where the flowers they were searching for grew. After returning to the inn, Hibiki greeted everyone. Lillian welcomed him with great excitement and showed him something they had bought especially for him as a way of thanking him. Hibiki was surprised because the food looked incredibly appetizing, but what caught his attention most was the black tea they had purchased. He immediately understood that they had done it because he had previously told them that he used to drink tea with his friends in his original world. While they were eating, he decided to use appraisal on his companions. Suddenly, he was stunned to discover that Lillian had become a level 1 sage. He told her immediately, and she was surprised, saying that she did not feel any different. However, Benny explained that Lillian was still very young, so the change would not be visible yet, although her magical power had definitely increased. Hibiki confirmed Benny's explanation and added that Lillian's grimoire had also leveled up. Benny became extremely excited and asked Hibiki to transfer the new knowledge inside the grimoire to her because doing so would allow her to expand her magical knowledge. Hibiki did as she requested, and Benny felt the enormous amount of information flowing into her. Afterward, she told him that she was now capable of teaching him new magical spells. Hibiki became so happy that he bowed before her and said, "Starting today, you are my teacher." Several days later, after completing all of their preparations, Hibiki said goodbye to Tanya and everyone else he knew. He also showed Claude and Lillian the cloaks made from the eternal spring flowers, which would allow them to remain cool no matter how high the temperature outside became. Claude thanked him for being so considerate of them. As usual, Bowles tried to convince Claude to make Hibiki train as intensely as possible, but Claude refused. Instead, Bowles warned them that the dungeon they were heading toward was extremely dangerous and that they had to remain cautious at all times. In the end, he wished them luck. A few minutes later, Hibiki climbed into the wagon with his companions, and they set off enthusiastically toward their new adventure. From a distance, however, Evil watched them with a smile. After learning that they were heading to the dungeon, he saw it as the perfect opportunity for them to die there. At the same time, in a distant city, a group of undead attacked the town. However, 4 young men stood against them, wiped them out, and rescued the citizens while proudly declaring that they were the Undead Slayer team. After the 4 reunited, they began reviewing their plan. Taiki told them that they were following the correct path and that the spirit he had encountered earlier was the one who had guided him toward it. One of them then said that he hoped to meet his relative Gibi as soon as possible. The rest of the team agreed, because all of them were eagerly waiting for the earliest possible chance to reunite with their friend. That night, after the long journey, Claude became exhausted and fell ill when the temperature throughout the forest suddenly dropped. Despite his sickness, he continued refusing to remove the cloak his master had given him, preventing his body from retaining warmth properly. The next morning, Hibiki went hunting in the forest. The moment he spotted an animal, he aimed his bow and killed it instantly with a single arrow. Hibiki was shocked by what he had done and believed that he had become incredibly powerful, but Sisti and Claude quickly ruined his excitement. They told him that what he was feeling was merely the thrill of beginning a new adventure, not proof that he had truly become strong. They explained that he still needed a great deal of training before he could become a real fighter. After the morning training, they continued their journey, but Hibiki was completely exhausted because of the brutal exercises Claude constantly forced him to endure. Claude kept telling him that he could not rely solely on his skills for the rest of his life, and that he needed to strengthen his own body. However, Hibiki could barely focus on what he was saying because the constant shaking of the wagon had made him severely dizzy. The others tried to calm him down and told him to breathe slowly, but nothing worked. In the end, he vomited everything in his stomach inside the wagon. A short while later, after they cleaned up the mess, Hibiki walked toward a pool of water to wash his face. But the moment he moved his hand closer, the water pulled away from him. He froze in astonishment, unable to understand what was happening. At that moment, Claude arrived with Lillian and Benny, and they explained that what he was looking at was not water at all. It was actually a massive gathering of slimes. Claude told him that this was an excellent opportunity to learn how to fight creatures without fixed forms. However, the condition was difficult. Hibiki had to defeat them without using any skills, relying only on a flame held in his hand. Hibiki stared at him in disbelief and became certain that his instructor was incredibly harsh when it came to training. He began chasing the slimes, and after a while, he noticed that they were afraid of fire. He became extremely excited, but soon discovered that they were terrifyingly fast and that he could not catch a single one of them. Suddenly, one of the slimes leaped onto his face and knocked him to the ground. Hibiki thought that this was the end and that he would die in that place, but he refused to give up. He remembered Imalia's promise that she would see him again, and he remembered that Claude and Lillian were waiting for him. He focused with all his strength and suddenly felt heat emerging from his fingertips. In the next moment, a tiny flame appeared in his hand. The flame caused the slimes to move away from him, and Hibiki rose to his feet, overjoyed because he had finally managed to use fire magic. However, his happiness did not last because all the slimes began merging together. At the same time, Sisti warned him that they had become extremely angry. Despite his fear, Hibiki tried to steady himself and placed his trust in the new magic he had just unlocked. He aimed his hand toward the giant slime, but instead of releasing a powerful attack, an extremely small flame appeared and vanished into the air. 1 second later, the slime struck him with tremendous force and sent him flying toward Claude. But instead of saving him, Claude caught Hibiki and threw him straight back toward the slime, ordering him to continue fighting. After a while of being struck and knocked down repeatedly, the slime grew bored and left, while Hibiki collapsed onto the ground from exhaustion. Lillian encouraged him and said that even if the fire had only been a tiny flame, he had still managed to use fire magic for the first time, and that this was the beginning of something great. That night, they set up camp in the same location. Hibiki felt slightly pleased because his fire magic had at least proven useful for something. During dinner, he told Claude that he felt his fire was too weak to be useful in battle. Claude replied that they were heading toward a place no one knew anything about, a place no one could reach without first crossing the dungeon. That was why he was training Hibiki so mercilessly, because he had promised to take him to Terradinas no matter what happened. At that moment, Sisti informed him that he had unlocked new skills. However, Hibiki was completely exhausted, so he glanced at them briefly and said he would examine them properly later before going to sleep. The next day, they continued their journey. Along the way, they encountered a terrified-looking group of people gathered together. When they asked what had happened, the people explained that their village had been overrun by undead, forcing them to flee. Even a little girl told them that a brave female adventurer had entered the village to help, while the others were still waiting for support from the Adventurers Guild. Claude began considering their options. If they traveled directly through the village, they would save a great deal of time, but it would also be the most dangerous route. If they took a different path around it, they would be safer, but the journey would become much longer. In the end, they decided to enter the village because their primary objective was to cross the northern dungeon, and fighting a few undead would give them additional training and experience. As soon as they approached the village, Claude warned everyone that the area was most likely filled with traps and that they needed to watch every step they took. However, when Hibiki noticed one of the traps, he saw that a monster was imprisoned inside it. Sisti told him that it was one of the undead. As Hibiki approached it, he accidentally activated every trap around him. Claude became furious and shouted, "I warned you about the traps only 1 second ago." At that moment, a group of undead appeared. However, before they could approach, a massive boulder came crashing down on them and crushed them all. They then heard a girl's voice asking, "What are you doing here?" The moment Hibiki heard her voice, he recognized her immediately. It was Fauna. They spoke for a while, and Fauna explained that after leaving the city, she had continued traveling from one place to another. When she reached this village, she found its people terrified of the undead, so she decided to help them. Claude remained suspicious of her because he remembered that she was a thief. Fauna completely denied having any bad intentions and openly admitted that she simply liked handsome boys. She added that having people assist her would make eliminating the undead much easier. In the middle of their conversation, Hibiki fell into another trap. Fortunately, Claude reached him in time and rescued him before anything could happen. Fauna was extremely surprised that Hibiki did not possess the trap detection skill because he had fallen into nearly every trap she had placed, which was incredibly strange for someone who possessed appraisal. He asked in surprise why one of the gems embedded in the wall had lit up. Claude explained that each gem represented a specific ruler, and whenever someone prayed to that ruler, the corresponding gem would glow as proof that the prayer had reached them. However, Hibiki noticed that one of the ruler's gems was missing. Suddenly, the church bell rang with terrifying force. The sound was so deafening that Hibiki and his companions stumbled out of the church, barely able to hear anything. But the moment they stepped outside, they saw undead creatures emerging from beneath the ground, one after another. Claude immediately charged at them, but he was shocked to discover that every undead creature he cut down continued moving as though nothing had happened. Even Lillian used fire magic against them, but it had no effect either. They quickly retreated into the church, and Fauna admitted that she did not understand the source of their power. However, she had noticed that their attacks were extremely organized, and that the undead emerged from the ground every time the bell rang. At that moment, the bell rang again. Claude told Hibiki and Lillian to climb up and investigate the bell tower, while he and Fauna defended the church and held back the undead. Claude and Fauna immediately entered a fierce battle against the monsters, while Hibiki and Lillian climbed to the top of the bell tower. But when they arrived, Hibiki was surprised to find that no one was there. He tried to help his companions by firing several arrows down at the undead, but they had no effect. Suddenly, the bell rang again, and because he was standing so close to it, the sound was terrifying enough to make him feel as though his ears were about to burst. Strangely, however, the bell was producing the sound without even moving. Hibiki used his appraisal skill, but the result told him that it was nothing more than an ordinary bell. Sisti then told him, "Appraise the area around you." Without hesitation, he and Lillian began searching every corner. Suddenly, Hibiki sensed that something was different in one corner of the tower. He activated Expert's Eye, instantly revealing a hidden spell before him. A concealed mirror then appeared, and at that moment, the bell inside the mirror began to move. The true ringing sound was coming from within it. Hibiki realized that the mirror had been the source of the entire sound. In a distant location, Aber was stunned that Hibiki had uncovered the trick so quickly. Such a feat should have been impossible for an ordinary appraisal user, but Hibiki had no time to think about it, because his companions were being overwhelmed by the undead. He summoned his bow, prepared an arrow of light, and fired it at the mirror. However, the arrow reflected off its surface and nearly struck Lillian by accident. Even so, he refused to give up. He gathered even more energy, while Lillian supported him with her magic, and together they attacked the mirror with all their strength. At last they managed to shatter it. A large part of the church collapsed in the process, but they successfully destroyed the mirror because one of the arrows had struck the real mirror that Aber had been hiding in front of herself. A short while later, Hibiki descended from the bell tower and said that he did not fully understand how everything had ended that way. Claude and Fauna were worried about him, but he simply told them that the important thing was that everything had ended safely. Afterward, the villagers returned and repeatedly thanked them for saving their lives. Claude, however, was still wondering what had caused the undead to appear. Fauna told him that the Adventurers Guild would handle the investigation. When she learned that they were heading toward the northern dungeon, she said goodbye to them because she had a different objective of her own. That same night, Aber was frustrated by the failure of her plan. At the same time, however, she was excited because killing Claude had proven far more difficult than she had imagined, and to her, that only made the situation more entertaining. Meanwhile, the ruler said that some mistakes could never be corrected. However, no matter what happened, he would never allow Hibiki to die, because when she awakened, the world had to still exist rather than being destroyed. Hibiki and his companions eventually arrived at the city gate. A guard stopped them and hesitated to allow the hero inside, while he was accompanied by two children. Claude became furious and ordered the guard not to underestimate his master. Even Lillian tried to help, explaining that Hibiki was older than he looked and was simply a little short. Hibiki, however, calmly pulled out his Adventurers Guild card and showed it to the guard. At the same time, Imalia was walking happily while imagining that Hibiki was surely thinking about her and might even miss her, since she had been the first friend he made in this world. But as she walked, the bracelet around her wrist began to glow. She immediately remembered that Aber possessed a similar bracelet, which meant that Aber was most likely in danger and was somewhere at the location visible on top of the hill. After entering the inn, Claude gathered the group and told them that before entering the dungeon, they needed to create a solid plan. Hibiki was confused and asked, "How are we supposed to make a plan when we don't even know what's inside?" Claude replied that this was the method the Adventurers Guild used to prevent reckless adventurers from throwing their lives away. He then explained everything he knew about the dungeon, including its different levels and the bosses found on each floor. Suddenly, Lillian said that she wanted to be the one to create the plan. Hibiki was surprised by her suggestion, but both he and Claude agreed to give her the opportunity. A short while later, while Lillian was busy preparing the plan, Hibiki admitted to Claude that he had an extremely embarrassing problem. He had forgotten to bring any underwear. He explained that he had packed everything else but had forgotten the most important thing. Once they entered the dungeon, he would not have time to wash his clothes, which would become extremely inconvenient. On top of that, clothing in this world was different, so he would not be able to purchase the kind he was accustomed to wearing. Benny laughed and said, "Have you forgotten that you possess skills?" She reminded him of a skill called copy and paste. Hibiki remembered it and decided to test it. He requested a large quantity of the clothes he needed, and suddenly, piles of clothing began raining down from the sky directly onto Benny. A short while later, Emilia arrived at the abandoned location the bracelet had guided her toward. Although she was slightly afraid of ghosts, she remained determined to save her friend. However, the moment she arrived, she saw a gigantic diamond-silver wolf. She immediately assumed that her friend was in danger, shouted for her to move away quickly, and fired a spirit arrow. The wolf attacked her instantly. Emilia used her spiritual power to create an enormous wall of stone, but the wolf shattered it with incredible ease. At that moment, Eber approached with a smile and said that she was proud of her servant because he would be extremely useful to her. Emilia was completely confused and had no idea what was happening, so she asked Eber what was going on. Eber replied that the wolf was her companion and that together they would bring peace to the world. But Emilia did not believe her. She told Eber that this clearly was not her true objective, and that she had believed they were friends, and that Eber would honestly share her plans with her. Eber mocked her and told her that she was incredibly naive. She then shattered the bracelet Emilia had used to find her, and ordered the wolf to attack once again. Emilia trapped it between stone walls before unleashing a massive tornado of spiritual wind. However, Eber easily summoned her mirror and reflected the entire attack. Emilia lost all her strength and collapsed to the ground in complete defeat. Eber approached while mocking her and said that although Emilia had caused her some inconvenience, she had never been her true target in the first place. Eber then disappeared from the area, while Emilia completely lost consciousness. The next day, Jibiki and his party arrived at the Adventurers Guild, where Lillian submitted their expedition plan. After reviewing it, the receptionist approved their entry into the dungeon. The moment they entered, Jibiki began relying on the world map, but Claude advised him not to depend on it constantly, so that he could develop his own sense of danger. Sisti also warned him that the dungeon was weakening his connection to the ruler. In the heavenly realm, the ruler was frustrated because he could not communicate with Jibiki. He told the ruler of magic that Jibiki intended to clear the dungeon and meet the sages so he could learn how to return to his own world. Afterward, he went to drink tea with the ruler of medicine. Inside the dungeon, they encountered a slime, and Hibiki defeated it easily. They then discovered that a massive boulder was actually a monster blocking the path. After Claude failed to break through it, Lillian destroyed it with a powerful fire spell, leaving Claude impressed by her strength. As they continued forward, Sisti confirmed that their connection to the ruler had weakened even further. Giant bees then appeared. Claude and Lillian defeated the monsters, but Jibiki noticed that the accuracy of his skills had decreased because of the weakening connection. When he explained the situation to the party, everyone decided to support him. Claude assured him that this was an opportunity to learn how to rely more heavily on his own abilities. Elsewhere, Molly regained consciousness and was surprised that she was still alive. Jibiki failed to hit a monstrous rabbit and was forced to run away until Lillian killed it. Afterward, he discovered a teleportation trap thanks to his experience, and Claude praised him for his progress. Several hours later, the party set up camp to rest. He used copy and paste to create a sandwich, then considered copying money, but Sisti warned him that doing so would be considered counterfeiting. They then began preparing to confront the boss of the 10th floor, the Silver Wolf. They agreed that they would try to defeat it without relying on Benny. That night, Sisti informed Jibiki that she had begun copying 2 of Claude's skills. At first, he felt as though he was cheating, but she explained that the copying process would only be completed if he was qualified to learn them. Claude was impressed and asked him to learn the rest of his skills as well, promising him even harsher training. The next day, after several hours of training, Jibiki mastered 2 new movement skills. They then reached the door leading to the boss room, but it suddenly opened, and 4 injured adventurers emerged from inside. Jibiki began healing them, while Claude prevented the monster inside from escaping. Lillian supported him with her spells until they managed to close the door again. After the adventurers regained consciousness, they warned the party that there were 3 silver wolves inside and that one of them was far more dangerous than the others. At the same time, Evil used magic to increase the wolf's power and confirmed that his true target was Jibiki. In the heavenly realm, the ruler was watching everything, but he was shocked when he learned that Jibiki had entered the boss room. Inside the boss room, Jibiki was stunned to discover that it contained an entire forest. Claude explained that it was an artificial environment designed to give the silver wolves an advantage. Using the map, Jibiki detected 2 nearby wolves and a third, stronger wolf at level 43. Prompting Claude to warn the party. He defeated the first 2 wolves, but enormous bushes then attacked them. Jibiki saved Lillian, but the storm dragged him away and separated him from the rest of the party. When he regained consciousness, he realized that he was far away from his companions. Sisti warned him that the wolf was standing directly behind him and that it was behaving with unnatural aggression. He continued fleeing with his movement skills, but the wolf trapped him inside a dome of roots. He immediately summoned Claude directly inside the dome. Claude attacked the wolf, checked that his master was safe, and then admitted that the battle would be difficult. At that moment, Jibiki transferred all of his levels to Claude, raising Claude's level to 74, while Jibiki returned to level 1. With his newfound power, Claude shattered the dome and killed the wolf with a decisive blow. After the battle ended, Jibiki found a strange black stone among the spoils. The moment he examined it, the ruler tried to warn him, but it was already too late. Evil spoke to him through the stone and told him that the wolf's failure had been part of his plan, and that Jibiki would not be able to escape from him. At that moment, a teleportation trap activated. Jibiki heard his companions screaming, along with the ruler ordering him to throw the stone away, but he could not release it from his hand. Sisti tried to save him, consuming every available skill and blessing under a direct command from the ruler, but the powerful interference caused her attempt to fail. In the end, Jibiki vanished before Claude and Lillian's eyes, leaving them in complete shock. Meanwhile, the ruler collapsed to the ground and said anxiously, "She has awakened." At the same time, Claude felt the mark connecting him to Jibiki beginning to weaken. He continued searching for him, unable to understand where he had gone. In the heavenly realm, the 2 female rulers wondered why the main ruler had become so weak. He explained that he had drained an enormous amount of power while trying to alter the properties of the teleportation trap, because sending his power through the dungeon had been extremely difficult. However, what he had never expected was for so many people to be targeting Hibiki. The 2 rulers said that they needed to inform the other rulers, but the main ruler refused. He told them there was no need, because Hibiki had now lost his protection, meaning that any ruler would be able to see and recognize him. The 2 rulers were stunned. When they remembered what our protagonist looked like, they wondered how they had failed to notice it before. The ruler apologized to them and explained that it had been a promise he had made, so he had been unable to reveal the truth. But ruler number 12 had now awakened, the ruler of mind, who had decided that the time had come to repair this world. At that same moment, Hibiki regained consciousness, still unable to process what had happened. The first thing he did was throw away the black stone he had been holding, completely terrified. However, he had no idea where he was. All he could think about was returning to Claude and Lillian as quickly as possible. He tried to activate World Map, but the skill did not work. Confused, he asked Sisti what was happening. Sisti did not answer. Hibiki then used appraisal on himself and was shocked to discover that a large number of his skills had been disabled. This made him even more anxious. Suddenly, Evil appeared before him, visibly furious that someone had tampered with the properties of the trap she had prepared. Hibiki recognized her immediately. While she noticed that the main ruler had managed to grant him protection, she could not understand why he cared so much about an ordinary boy like him. She then raised her hand and formed an enormous magical barrier that covered the entire area. She told him that the rulers would no longer be able to see what happened between them, meaning that he would die without anyone interfering. Hibiki became even more frightened and asked why she wanted to kill him when he had never done anything to her. Evil answered, "Because you stood in the way of my objective. Claude was supposed to die so balance could return to the world, but your appearance changed everything." She added, "And that is why you must die now, so the world can live in the peace my master seeks." Hibiki tried to use appraisal on her, but all of her statistics appeared completely ordinary. This made him suspect that what he was seeing was not her true form. At the same time, he felt slightly relieved when he discovered that Claude was still nearby. However, he decided not to call him, because if Claude came, he would leave Lillian alone inside the dungeon. Hibiki began running while desperately avoiding the magical projectiles Evil fired at him. Evil was surprised that Hibiki was no longer using the same skills he had fought with before, but she remained convinced that he was incredibly powerful. She decided to test the absolute limit of his strength and launched a gigantic sphere of energy at him. The explosion destroyed a large part of the area. When the smoke cleared, she saw Hibiki lying on the ground, barely conscious. This surprised her because she discovered that, in the end, he was far more ordinary than she had expected. She decided to finish him and summoned her personal magical sword. At that moment, Hibiki heard someone calling to him and suddenly found himself inside a strange dream. Standing before him was a girl who resembled him so closely that they looked like twins. The girl greeted him and explained that he was now inside a world resembling a dream. She then asked, "What do you think of this world? A world where everything is governed by the skills and abilities the rulers grant to people?" She added that the world might be unfair to many humans because the rulers controlled everything. Hibiki answered that honestly, he could not judge it yet because he still did not know this world well enough. The girl said that she had expected that answer, especially since he came from another world. Hibiki then began opening up to her. He explained that ever since arriving, he had faced one danger after another. Monsters had nearly killed him more than once. The ruler who had sent him there was incredibly reckless, and on top of everything else, a strange girl was now determined to kill him. The girl asked, "So, do you believe living in this world is truly that difficult?" Hibiki thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "Despite everything, I've also made many friends and met people who genuinely helped me." He added, "Because of them, I've become more mature than I was before. If I compare the monsters and difficult situations with the people I've met, then the good I've witnessed is far greater than the evil." The girl smiled, satisfied with his answer, and told him, "Case, I will overlook the matter for now." She then added, "Unfortunately, I still do not possess enough power to protect you. All I can offer you is a small gift." She then handed him a cup of tea. He accepted the cup and drank from it. She told him that the moment he left that place, he would regain consciousness, but he needed to leave quickly, because if he delayed, he would die. Hibiki panicked and ran toward the door. Before leaving, however, he suddenly stopped and looked closely at the girl. Only then did he realize just how much they resembled one another, as though they were identical twins. But he had no time to think about it any further, so he quickly left the place. The moment he regained consciousness, Evil was just about to kill him. Hibiki activated Quick Step and swiftly slid away from the sword strike, hiding at a distance. Evil became furious, unable to understand how he was still alive. At that moment, Hibiki heard Sisti's voice again, and she informed him that the level of his quick-step skill had increased. Hibiki was overjoyed to know that Sisti had returned, and realized that this had to be the gift the ruler of mind had given him. He quickly asked Sisti, "How can I defeat evil?" Sisti calmly replied, "You have no chance of winning. Your best option is to use any attack you can, even if its probability of success is extremely low." Hibiki understood what she meant, but the plan still felt incredibly desperate. Despite how dangerous the plan was, the moment Evil destroyed one of the crystals, our protagonist suddenly appeared behind her and attacked with a burst of fire. He then used bubble cleaning and unleashed the strongest attack he possessed. However, the attack caused absolutely no physical damage to Evil. All it did was clean her extremely well. Honestly, no one knows what our protagonist had expected from that attack. Evil noticed that Hibiki was moving with far greater agility and assumed it was because of the main ruler's protection. At the same time, Sisti ordered Hibiki to celebrate because he had increased his skill level. Hibiki was completely confused and wondered why he should celebrate, but he followed her instructions. Evil misunderstood the situation and assumed that he was mocking her directly to her face. She became enraged and cast a weakening spell on him, causing all of Hibiki's skills to return to level 1. Hibiki became terrified, but Sisti smiled and told him that this was exactly what she had wanted. The tutorial guide skill was now capable of activating the beginner guidance effect once again. Suddenly, a magical gate opened and Emilia emerged from it. The moment she appeared, she attacked Evil while shouting, "Hibiki is my friend. I'll never forgive you for trying to hurt him." Hibiki was even more shocked when he realized that Sisti had deliberately provoked Evil into lowering his level, allowing her to reactivate the beginner feature. Evil mocked Emilia and told her that she had come here to die by her own choice. A violent battle then erupted between them, shaking the entire area. Sisti told Hibiki not to interfere because his current level was far too low. But at that moment, Hibiki heard Claude and Lillian's voices through the connection mark. They told him that they could see everything happening through the mark. Benny told him that he could use appraisal to uncover Evil's weakness. Hibiki followed her instructions and used appraisal on Evil. During the battle, Evil deflected every one of Emalia's attacks, and Emilia began to lose. Just as Evil's arrows were about to strike her, Hibiki saved her and pulled her away. However, Evil hit him with a magical arrow and knocked him to the ground. While lying there, Hibiki remembered that Evil's main ability was reflecting attacks. He also remembered the plan they had used against the horned rabbit, so he trapped her inside an earthen wall. He then prepared his spirit bow and, with Amalia's help, activated the true loyalty contract. He borrowed Claude and Lillian's power, causing his strength to increase tremendously. Hibiki fired a devastating arrow of light. The attack was too fast for Evil to reflect, striking her directly and destroying a large part of her body. Evil admitted defeat and revealed that the body she had been using was merely an illusory vessel. She promised to return in a stronger body, then disappeared. After the battle, Hibiki thanked Amalia for saving him once again, and she was overjoyed to see him. As his skills returned to normal, the effect of the level 1 guide ended. Suddenly, Amalia began being pulled back through the gate. Before she disappeared, Hibiki gave her a keepsake. However, after returning, she discovered that what she had received was actually nothing more than a button from her own clothes that had fallen off during the battle. Hibiki then heard Claude and Lillian's voices again. They were crying with joy after learning that he was still alive. Even the main ruler congratulated him for winning without direct intervention. However, the two female rulers scolded him because the awakening of the ruler of mind could have destroyed the entire world, while the ruler remained confident that the danger had passed. In the end, Hibiki followed Sisti's instructions and the signal from the connection mark, allowing him to reunite with Claude and Lillian and continue their journey toward the city of Tirada. At the same time, Amani's group arrived in Tirada and entered the Adventurers Guild to ask about Hibiki. They explained that he was always getting himself into trouble because of his kindness. At that moment, Amalia arrived and offered to take them to the place where he was. And this is where our story comes to an end, dear viewers. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to see the second season, let me know in the comments. And before you close the video, do not forget to press the like button to support us. Subscribe to the channel to follow more episodes, and activate the notification bell so you can watch all the new anime on the channel. Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and we'll see you in new episodes. Goodbye.